The year is 1391, and the Eastern Roman Empire, or at least what remains of it, is in dire straits. The extremely long and chaotic reign of John V was characterized by the Black Death, civil wars, palace coups, and, most dangerous of all, the tightening Ottoman grip over Constantinople itself. By this point, John and his empire were vassals to the growing Ottoman Empire, under the leadership of Sultan Bayezid I. One hand in Asia, one hand in Europe, both at the neck of the Roman Empire, strangling Constantinople. Such was the scene when John V died, his son and heir, Manuel II, Palaeologos, assuming his new role as emperor in March of 1391, much to the fury of the Sultan. To say Manuel had a difficult task ahead of him would be an understatement. To many on the streets, it must have seemed as if the Ottoman conquest of their beloved city was a matter of when, not if. But Manuel, unwilling to sit by and watch the remaining fragments of the Roman Empire be chipped away, took matters into his own hands, even if, in vain, Manuel's endeavours reaffirmed that traditional Roman stubbornness, even right through to the very end. Throughout the first few years of Manuel's reign, things were relatively peaceful, the Sultan remaining as a lingering threat, hiding in the Anatolian shadows, unwilling to strike just yet. But in time, this new eastern threat slowly but surely began to alarm the rest of Europe, as the Ottomans made their way through the Balkans, where by the late 14th century, not just the Eastern Roman Emperor was terrified by the Ottoman advance. So too was Sigismund of Luxembourg, the King of Hungary and the future Holy Roman Emperor, stunned at the might of his new enemies creeping along his southern border. As such, in 1395, Sigismund sent out an appeal to the rest of Europe, an appeal for men-at-arms to halt Ottoman expansionism into the heartlands of Europe itself. In other words, Sigismund had sown the seeds of a crusade. By their thousands, men from France, Spain, Italy, England, Bohemia, the Teutonic Order, and many, many others made their way to King Sigismund. His call to arms was quite clearly a resounding success. In addition, the commander of the French troops was a certain Jean II Le Mangre, otherwise known as Marshal Boucicaut, who would jointly lead this new crusading army alongside Sigismund himself. And thus, in mid-1396, Sigismund, Boucicaut, and tens of thousands of Christian knights made their way down the Danube. On this march, they must have felt invincible, a force comprised of men from almost every single Christian realm in Europe. One can imagine their almost divine confidence, the collective might of Europe, against this annoying little upstart empire, not even 100 years old by this point. As such, led by the promise of salvation, and most likely the promise of plunder, the crusading army made their way southward, finally meeting the Ottoman army near the town of Nicopolis on the Danube frontier, where they were absolutely devastated. Yeah, the majority of the Crusaders were either killed or captured, including both of their leaders, King Sigismund and Marshal Boucicaut, who were later ransomed. In short, the so-called Crusade of Nicopolis was a complete disaster. To Manuel, such news must have been a dreadful shock. If not even Sigismund's efforts could repel the Ottoman might, what chance in hell did he have given his resources, or lack thereof? In addition, after being ransomed, Boucicaut made his way back to France to report of the bad news to King Charles VI in Paris, persuading the king to send even more men-at-arms to the east, in aid of the Roman Emperor. To this, the king consented, and Boucicaut made his way back east with a few thousand men, reaching Constantinople and helping to lift the ongoing Ottoman blockade around the city in 1399, though not enough for anything long-lasting. While there, Boucicault must have seen just how dire the situation in the capital was. The city itself was a shell of what it had been even just 200 years earlier. Now, the Ottoman stranglehold could visibly be seen, with newly constructed castles rising on the Asian side of the Bosphorus, such as the fort of Anadolu Hisari, which still stands today. In any case, Boucicault, now a firm ally and friend of the Emperor, saw what needed to be done. If Manuel wanted any help at all, let alone another full-blown crusade, he would have to travel to the west in person. In particular, Boucicault suggested his homeland, France. Manuel, incredibly reluctant to leave the city completely for God knows how long, considered Boucicault's advice. Such consideration eventually materialized as conviction. In December of 1399, the Eastern Roman Emperor left the capital, en route to gain support in the west. When I think of this moment, I can't help but wonder what was going through his mind. His journey had the weight of an entire city on his back, a city hanging on by a single thread, a thread woven by his crown, a thread he would tie around the rest of Europe. By the April of 1400, Manuel finally landed in Venice. No bad blood there, I'm sure, and was treated warmly. Customary festivities and banquets thrown for the emperor's arrival, not just in Venice, but in every northern Italian city he passed through as he made his way up the Po Valley. Not long later, and Manuel had made it to France, his entourage making their way north to the capital, which they would eventually reach in June 1400. In Paris, Manuel was greeted by Charles VI, the infamous King of France who believed he was quite literally made of glass, and suffered bouts of psychosis so bad he was often called Charles the Mad. Not the best person to do diplomacy with. In any case, Manuel was customarily welcomed and treated with the utmost respect. The king and the emperor celebrating a great feast at the monastery of Saint-Denis, just north of Paris, and an entire wing of the Louvre was dedicated to Manuel. In response, Manuel, likely flattered by Charles's lavish welcome, finally got down to business. Would Charles consider yet another crusade against the Ottomans? To which Charles responded with a rather firm no. This must have been a kick in the stomach to Manuel. 2,200 kilometers from Constantinople, yet nothing to show for it. He had tried his hardest to persuade Charles, but to no avail. The king would not budge, a crusade was not on the cards. Yet all was not lost. After all, Charles was not the only monarch in Europe. In fact, not far at all from Paris, another major capital could be found. Perhaps here, Manuel must have thought, another chance may arise. As such, in the winter of 1400, Manuel crossed the Channel and landed in England, the first Roman emperor to set foot on the British Isles since before the fall of the Western Roman Empire, almost 1,000 years earlier. Much like in Paris, Manuel was immediately treated lavishly by the king, this time King Henry IV, who he would end up staying with for the next several months, until early next year. Manuel met the king at Eltham Palace in Greenwich, just southeast of London, where he was treated with all the pomp and expense you may expect by now, including a feast on Christmas Day. Yet, while marvellous gifts and exquisite banquets were all well and good, once again Manuel needed to talk business, military business, with the king. Henry listened to Manuel's pleas attentively, and apparently the royal court was genuinely moved by the emperor's determination and Christian zeal, even despite him not being a Catholic. As it turned out, Henry did promise the emperor money, men, and ships, but a crusade? That was one step too far, and like the King of France, the King of England refused Manuel. leaving the emperor at square one once again. Manuel would end up staying in London until early 1401, where he would return to Paris and remain for an entire year, negotiating with other foreign monarchs, such as the King of Aragon, the King of Portugal, and the two rival popes in Rome and Avignon, respectively. Yet, in every corner of Europe, only excuses and rejections came back to him. This was his problem, and his problem alone, is effectively what he'd been told. By mid-1402, Manuel must have been cursing the lackluster will of the West. Yet around this time, a wholly unexpected salvation came to Manuel. As it turned out, this salvation was not the aid of a Western Christian power, but yet another Eastern Muslim power, a new beast which struck fear into the hearts of both the Romans and Ottomans alike. The infamous Timur and his great empire had reached Anatolia, decimating the Ottoman army at the Battle of Ankara in July 1402, in which the Ottoman Sultan, Bayezid I, and his son were both captured, Bayezid eventually dying in captivity. Timur's wrath was immediately realized across Anatolia, reaching the Aegean shore and slaughtering the Knights of St. John in Smyrna, the final Christian stronghold to remain on the peninsula. Manuel, likely both surprised and overjoyed at the Ottoman defeat, now made his way back home, reaching Venice in 1403 and given 3 Venetian warships for his entourage to make it back safely to Constantinople. At long last, from his departure in December 1399, in June 1403, Manuel was back in Constantinople. A relatively fruitless endeavour in retrospect, but by now, it did not matter. Not long later, the Ottomans, severely weakened by Timur's surprise decimation, signed a truce with the Eastern Roman Empire, freeing the empire from the Sultan's vassalage and any obligations to pay tribute. Thus, by 1403, the Romans were at peace with the Ottomans, and Timur was gone as soon as he arrived, never quite seeing fit to extend his dominions further west towards Europe, a collective sigh of relief for all in the Balkans and Asia Minor, Christians and Muslims alike. Manuel's journey to the west, although ultimately unsuccessful, was commendable. In his stead, many a worse emperor would have likely sat back and watched Constantinople burn. But not Manuel II Palaeologos. He tried and tried to no avail, but at least he did something, and the Roman Empire would live on for years to come. Albeit not much longer, as we all know. Thanks for watching.